Good afternoon. Would you tell us your names, please?
Hi, I'm Sam.
And I'm Nicole, and this is our project, Get the Lead Out.
And what led you to choose this topic?
We chose this topic because when we did the experiment, there were a lot of lead recalls on toddler items, and we were wondering if adults were exposed to lead too.
And what was your hypothesis that you examined?
Our hypothesis was that toddlers would have a greater exposure to lead because so many items and toys for toddlers have been made in China, and they just had a whole bunch of recalls because of the massive amounts of lead found in the toys. So we think that a toddler would have a greater exposure.
Can you tell us about your experiment and the data you collected?
Well, we did two different types of experiments because you had to test differently for metals and ceramics. For things that weren't metals or ceramics, what you did was you cleaned the item, and then you dropped 4 drops of an Abotics indicator solution that came with our lead tester kit onto a Q-tip, and then you rubbed that Q-tip on the spot that you were testing for lead. And if it turned a certain color on the chart, then that would show you how many parts per million of lead there were on the item. And the darker it was, the more lead. So, like it was black, it had 50 parts per million. And for the second experiment for metals and ceramics, what we did was we got a container filled with white vinegar, and we put the item in there to clean it and get all the lead out because they're harder to find the lead. And then we tested the white vinegar, we put a tablespoon of it into a test tube, and then we dropped 4 drops of the solution into that, and then then that would change the color, and we compared it to the graph, and then we found how many parts per million of lead there was.
And what materials or specifics would you like to tell us about?
We used a lead kit, and we used a plastic Tupperware, and we used white vinegar, and we used 6 toddler items and 6 adult items that were similar. We used a toddler sippy cup and a mug for adults. Then we used plastic plate keys for toddlers and a colored key, like that one, for adults. And then we used a toddler toothbrush for toddlers and an adult toothbrush for adults.
And then we used a play mat for toddlers, a yoga mat for adults, a cheap toddler necklace for toddlers, and an adult necklace for adults. And then we used a toddler play bracelet for toddlers and an adult bracelet for adults.
Can you show us about your charts or tell us about your graphs?
This first graph, it compares the total averages between toddlers and adult items. And the second one here, it compares the averages of amounts of lead between toddler and adult items. And the blue bars represent the toddler averages, and the green bar represents the averages for adults.
Did your experiment work?
We believe that our experiment worked because our data was able to answer our question.
And what did you learn?
We learned that an adult had a greater exposure to lead in their everyday environment. And even though the toddlers, you can see, had more items with an exposure to lead, more items with lead in it, the adults had a greater exposure because they had higher levels of lead, and they used those things more often than toddlers do.
Were there any surprises in your experiment?
Well, one surprise we had in our experiment was on the day we were about to test, we read our directions thoroughly for the first time. We had just skimmed it earlier, but we actually read every little thin print. And we found that you have to test differently, use a different method to test metal and ceramic. So it really surprised us, and we thought, hey, maybe it might change our data, but even though the packet said it won't, it's all the same. So that was a big surprise.
And we also were really surprised when we were testing it. We expected to see a lot of of amounts of lead in the toddler items. So when we rubbed the Q-tip on the items, we expected the Q-tip to have color on it, but it surprised us because there was no color on some items. So, and at first we thought that something was wrong with the test product, but then after a few test trials, we figured out that it really worked and that there just wasn't any lead in the items.
And what might you do to improve your experiment?
To improve our experiment, we might have found a lead test kit that actually tested everything one way, including the metal and the ceramic. Just use one way to test it for everything.
Okay, thank you very much.